Hi there, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of Between the Lines Live. My name is Vanessa Rader from Ray White Commercial, and I'm here with a panel of experts to talk about all things apartment block market, particularly up here in Brisbane. So it's great to be in sunny Brisbane today and joined by James Hanley. And James is from our Special Projects division, so welcome so much.
Thanks very much, Vanessa.
And we've got a special guest here with us. We've got Nikki Carrodus, and Nikki is a buyer's agent from Cohen Handler. So thank you, Nikki, for coming.
Thank you, Vanessa. Pleasure to be here.
It's very, very exciting because looking across, we do obviously a lot of work across residential and commercial markets, and resi in Brisbane is obviously going gangbusters. It is across the country, to be fair, but between Perth and Brisbane, totally the market that has been seeing the greatest amount of growth when it comes to houses and also units. Affordability is key concern for a lot of buyers in the market. We've got the first home buyers now with the 5%. There's a lot going on in the residential space, not a lot of development. So it's a really good time for us to revisit this topic of apartment buildings and unit block market. So we'll start with you, Nikki. So Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and all the things that you're doing, particularly in this part of the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm a buyer's agent at Cohen Handler. I represent investors, specifically purchasing unit blocks. It's one of my core areas. And I also do primary residence purchasing as well, predominantly on the south side of Brisbane.
And so you have a lot of people looking for apartment blocks as a specific kind of asset class. A lot of people really don't understand what do we mean when we're talking about apartment blocks or unit blocks here in Brisbane. Can you give us what is it? How does it compare to, say, like a normal residential purchase? Yeah, absolutely. Look,
unit blocks they're quite an incredible investment, particularly here in Brisbane at the moment, because what they usually are is, a pack, like a 4, 6, 10, 12 pack, maybe even more, of usually brick, sometimes timber, walk-up unit blocks. Those, not very fancy, daggy double brick blocks that were built in the 60s and 70s and 80s on these wonderful big blocks of land at that time, which were probably not that big at that time, but now they are big blocks of land. And they are able to be developed down the track as well. So particularly in Queensland and Brisbane specifically, there are a lot of houses that anything built before 1946, World War II, you can't knock down to keep the character of what Brisbane really is. Whereas these unit blocks are all brick. Some of them are timber. You can't knock them down. But myself and my clients particularly like the brick ones, where you can rent them all out. They can be strata titled, not usually if they're owned by one owner, which is what I typically specialise in. And they're presenting really, really good yields at the moment. So with the housing shortage that we've got here, huge demand, low supply, we've got really good yields on these properties. And then you've got that long-term capital growth with some development upside at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Well, obviously the rental market's really tight. We're not building a lot of apartments. So just the occupying side of things is probably quite attractive to those investors. And so you're dealing with the people wanting to buy, and you're dealing with trying to get people to sell these assets, because I understand they're quite tightly held. They're a lucrative investment asset class.
They are, yeah.
It is. Not a lot of them on the market, not a lot of them available.
Yeah, correct. They're incredibly thinly traded, the unit blocks, and they always have been across Brisbane. Typically, they're an intergenerational asset for owners. So passed down through the family. Sometimes their parents might have built the property that's been passed down, and usually they're a bit of a trophy asset class for owners. So very rarely do they hit the market, and that just drives demand for these properties. When they do hit the market, there's typically very little competition or stock that competes for that asset. They get a huge amount of attention when they go to sale. Typically, they are sold via auction, which is a common method of sale for these properties, and it's a testament to the demand, because typically you get 10, 20 bidders at an auction more times than not. Yeah.
That must make things a bit tough for you with that much competition in the marketplace.
It's tough.
It's
tough. And I think at the moment there's just so many people looking for this type of stock.
So why is it attractive? So I suppose there's so many exit strategies. Like we talked about the really good quality rents that are being achieved, albeit the rents haven't grown probably to the same extent that we've seen the kind of capital values when you're looking at the more broader kind of residential market. So that looks really attractive. Yep. They're intergenerational assets, like you said. So they've been holding for a long time because they've had that kind of income stream, and that's obviously really attractive. But looking at exit strategies, there's so many. Could you strata subdivide these assets as well, or can you redevelop them, seeing they're on these big parcels of land? Like, who your clients? What are they looking for? Or is that a different answer for different buyers?
It's a different answer for different buyers. So what I didn't mention before about myself is I am, and before I became a buyer's agent, I was an investor in these assets and still continue to be with a consortium from Sydney. And we are generally looking for these assets to leverage off this, huge capital growth that's happening across the southeast Queensland region. And the idea is to buy them, fix them up just a little bit in order to get the yields up, and then hold them, right?
Okay.
Hold them until, we want to sell. And we've experienced some pretty amazing success already with that strategy. We purchased one just over 2 years ago at a 5% yield. It's just a little 6-pack, 4 1-bedders, 2 2-bedders. And we were able to move the yield up from 5% to it's going to hit about 9% shortly, with having probably invested about $20,000 in improvements over that time. So from that perspective, it's an amazing asset.
Or just the income, just that, that cash flow. We see people buy a lot of commercial assets for, very similar sort of yields, but that kind of upside in terms of capital growth is probably not as attractive.
That's right. There's quite a few different types of buyers that we've worked with. There's the developers who want to hold and develop down the track. There's the mums and dads who just want that yield play, negative gearing to start off with, and maybe even get a positive gear asset down the track. And then we've also been working with a few buyers who convert these properties into short-term stay.
So what do you mean by short-term stay? Like Airbnb?
Yeah, exactly. Airbnb. So there are a class of buyers who have found this opportunity where they're looking for the bigger blocks near exhibition grounds, stadiums, hospitals, close to the city, and then converting them into short-term stay accommodation. So furnishing them, engaging a property manager who specifically specialises in this sort of accommodation. And then it's quite amazing actually, because these things, if you're buying in the right area and they're big enough, they can run at 100% occupancy all year round or close to, and provide maybe up to 10% yield. So quite an amazing asset if you've got the appetite to do that sort of that approach.
They're quite remarkable too, in that they've managed to get it where it's quite passive now for those owners. I mean, typically buyers look at that model and feel like it's quite an intensive management process as an owner, but there's now groups who sort of sit in between and can manage it to a point for an owner where it's simply just, getting a check once a week, once a month sort of thing. So yeah, it's a growing part of the unit block market, and particularly for blocks like Nikki said, which are close to hospitals, close to stadiums, anywhere really in a city. It's only going to continue to grow and get looked at.
And do they have like any sort of backlash from neighbours or anything with stuff like that? Like, I know that you can do Airbnb anywhere, but some people probably not like that so much.
We took to market a block very recently, which was a block of 7 one-bedroom units, all leased through short stay. And the feedback was like the returns are incredible, but there is some ongoing risk element around some pushback from local council or neighbours ultimately.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, I mean, it is, like I said, it's important inner city locations where I think most residents are acknowledging that if you're going to live in the inner city, there's going to be bit of that. Yeah.
That's super. I never thought of it from that whole short stay perspective. But yeah, a lot more management intensive, but the returns would be so much more that, you could really, interesting.
We're seeing more demand in that space leading up to the Olympics because of our infrastructure shortage in terms of workers. And so a lot of builders are now bringing staff or bringing workers up.
No, I've got friends in Sydney that they travel up and they spend the week up here and do work.
And they're putting them in these short stays.
Exactly right, yeah. So labourers or tradies and hospital workers are very, they give you a really good depth of tenancy base as long as you're close in the inner city. Yeah.
So that's if you buy these assets for that kind of income stream. But what about that whole idea of buying and sell down? Do you see much of that?
Yeah, look, typically, 3 or 4 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that. As a rule, 90% of the buyer profile was to purchase as an investment. What's changed in Brisbane over the last, I would say 12 months, maybe 18, is the pricing for individual units has skyrocketed. And that all comes back to affordability. So affordability is the key driver of our market at the moment. We're seeing huge depth of buyer demand for apartments anywhere from $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. That's only going to be further incentivised by the new federal government policy that came in October. What I've seen more recently is there has been groups position themselves to focus on acquiring a block of units to ultimately spend some money, do them up, strata title them, and then sell them down individually. And the unit values are there on the basis that you need to buy it well enough that there is a margin in it.
Yeah. Is that a big exercise to strata convert something like that?
Well, there's two elements. I mean, these properties are offered to the market with existing strata title. However, it's held in one ownership, so it's a very simple body corporate. To go and do that properly, you do need to establish a complete body corporate in place to go and do the strata titling. The fire safety compliance is the big cost item, but away from that, it's very straightforward. And I mean, speaking from in the development site world, the most difficult part of that market is the construction element. It's a very expensive process to get anything out of the ground at the moment. When you're strata titling and selling a block of units, there's no build cost element. No. It's quite simply all done on paper. So it's reasonably straightforward. As I said, the fire safety element is probably the key to work through. Yeah.
And you're getting some developers who are buying these blocks run down and then fixing them up to a really high spec. So like stone bench tops, ducted air conditioning, they look really cool. And then they sell them off.
Yeah.
Can be a really good strategy as well. And you're getting, what was 2 years ago buying even a two-1-1 in one of these unrenovated things, probably about $550,000. Unrenovated now, we're looking at probably $700,000, $800,000, depending on the location. And then if you fix them up to that level, because they're nice and big, they're double brick, they've got low-body corporates, you can get $1 million for these things.
Wow. Well, that's the next thing. So when you're buying them like all in one line, essentially, are you getting, I'm assuming you're getting a pretty substantial discount or no? The discount, there has always been a discount for these assets.
There's always been a discount in Brisbane, and I would have quoted maybe 10, 15% as a discount. I mean, that does include stamp duty, which is a pretty, a key cost, which encompasses that 10%. That margin is thinning just because of supply. So there's such little supply, such high demand. Of course, that margin from wholesale to retail value of the units is thinning. However, what's happening is obviously there's such strong growth in that unit market. If a seller is unaware of how much that has grown recently, then there's an opportunity for a buyer to come in and strata title and make a reasonably quick return through a project like that in selling 6 or 12 or how many units they want to do.
Yeah. Well, I can in Sydney. I'm obviously from Sydney, and this is a big part of our market. It has been for quite some time. But I've just watched the discount for these kind of assets like dwindle away to which like you nearly can't even see a discount. Like it's an asset class that people just want to get into for all of these reasons. It's the income, it's a kind of future potential, and particularly in Sydney now we've got all this new development around transport links and stuff like that. The potential for bigger developments and is obviously massive. Just there's like no discount. It's
remarkable.
It is remarkable,
isn't it? I mean, there are so many different ways of buyers when they approach these properties. So you still do get developers buying them to control pipeline in, say, 3 to 5 years. A lot of them are positioned in the city fringe or in the burbs where they will get potential density uplift in the short term, I would have thought, given where they're located. You also, obviously, we've spoken about build and sell down. You also get investors looking for a tax loss. So simply to hold them, take a tax loss, and then get the capital gains on the back end when they go and sell when they retire in 10 or 20 years. So there's a number of different ways groups approach these assets, and that just adds to the demand when you have one on the market. Yeah.
So it sounds like that the demand for these assets are pretty wide-reaching then. So you've got a real range of, is there, like, it's hard, I suppose, to typecast who's buying these things. It's just... anyone
A
that has
lot of mums and dads
Yeah.
at the moment. I'm getting a lot of inquiry from mums and dads. I've got your more sophisticated investors on the books, and developers as well. Like it's
but private
broad.
or private.
All private.
And up here in Queensland, are you seeing the movement of people that have probably been outpriced in Sydney coming up? Because Brisbane's looking pretty attractive in terms of affordability when you compare it to somewhere like a Sydney.
Well, that's how it all started for me, right? So,
You're from Sydney originally, yeah?
I lived in Sydney for many years, and
Yeah.
I was practicing law in Sydney. And when I decided to move back to Brisbane, I grew up here. I've got 2 small children, wanted to be close to family. I was looking at, having a bit of a career change, and it was proposed to me by some lawyers that I knew in Sydney that I would help them find specifically these type of assets. And I had said, well, I don't really know much about purchasing property because I've only ever used buyer's agents before. And the response was, we'll go and learn. So I approached my buyer's agent at the time, who I'd been working with, who's Jordan Navy Box, he's managing director of the Queensland arm of Cohen Handler, and asked him to help me with the first purchase and train me up. And he offered me a job. And the rest is history,
as they say.
But yeah, it all came from the idea that these blocks in Sydney were, you needed $4 or $5 million.
Oh, if not more.
Back then,
Yeah.
At a 2, maybe 3% yield.
Yes.
Whereas here it was 5+%
Yeah.
when we started looking at these. So, they saw a huge potential there.
So in the market, I know you gave a few examples now, but in the marketplace at the moment, like I said, very thin, not a lot, they're not traded an awful lot, but any kind of recent transactions you can possibly give us an idea in terms of yield or kind of price point even. What sort of prices are we talking about here? It's all well and good for us to be talking this, but for everyone listening.
Yeah, when you talk to yield, the big factor is a passing yield versus a market yield.
So what's the difference between those two?
Well, the big one is that most blocks, when they go to market, are typically under-rented to some degree. And not always significantly, but if you're capitalising that existing passing rent, usually you're not competitive. So as a buyer, you do need to factor in, what is the market rent on the next renewal, which might be 12 months away? Mm-hmm. What can I actually rent that unit for? And that's ultimately the rent you need to be capitalising if you want to be competitive in buying one of these properties. Now, typically on a market yield, like Nikki sort of mentioned, they trade from 4 to 5.5%. Mm-hmm. But if you look at a passing yield and you go through the list of transactions, they get anywhere from 2%, 2.5%, 3% sort of thing. So there's some key considerations. But as a rule on a market yield, it's usually in and around that 4.5% to 5% mark. Yeah.
And what sort of dollar, like you mentioned, how much they were in Sydney? I know that this is a big question, depends on where it is, how big it is, but we're looking at asset size between...
Anywhere between 1.5 mil, would you say, James?
It's very hard to find one at 1.5.
Very hard, quite far out. Right,
you need to be buying them.
So, we've got a little one we've just listed, which is a block of 4 in Ipswich at the moment, which is a more palatable price point for an entry-level investor.
Yeah.
As a rule, you very rarely would see a 6-pack sold in Brisbane below 3 million. At most are now well into the 3s. And you're sort of working up from there.
Yeah.
As a rule, if you start talking 12 and 16 units and 20 units, you do deal with a more sophisticated investor, and with, opportunity cost of capital to look at what a net yield might be in a retail building or commercial, particularly talk a triple net lease. There's some consideration there, and the yield does soften a little bit. But there's huge depth of market from anywhere from 2 to 5 in Brisbane, from mum and dads to developers to
and SMSF.
Self-managed super funds, all of that. Yeah.
And in terms of borrowing, I suppose is it treated just the same as a residential sort of mortgage?
Depends on the size.
Depends on the size. Yeah.
Yeah, anything above 5 units in the pack, you've got to get a commercial loan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the big one is if you do take to market a pack of 3 or 4, they get incredibly strong demand because typically the buyer gets a better LVR and a much better rate. Yeah. While if you do go plus 4 or 5, it is dependent on the banks.
Yes.
You then go to a commercial loan as a rule. So, which is interesting. They're essentially residential real estate and they have very little risk. They're incredibly defensive in how strong the tenant, the profile is of the tenant. They're not going anywhere. It's very easy to replace a tenant in this space versus a shop
Retail or
front
something, yeah.
where you could have a vacancy sign out the front for 18 months.
Yes.
So I think that's what the attraction is. They are very defensive. But yeah, usually it's sort of 5 to 6 units. You then go to a commercial loan and LVRs might be 70%, 60%.
Okay. And the banks do have appetite, though, to lend in this space, or is it location sensitive?
Yeah, from what I've seen, they do, particularly in Brisbane.
Yeah.
I think that appetite drops away slightly because it's just a little bit more untested when you go maybe out into the regions.
Yeah.
But particularly in Brisbane, yeah, there's very little. The key risk I think banks foresee is asset risk around, they are older buildings, like these are 50, 60, 70-year-old buildings. And they do usually they either have some faith in the borrower or the purchaser to make sure they do know what they're doing. If not, they usually do a pretty thorough test of what that building is like, before they lend.
And so for when they're valued, then how do they just assess it like apartment, or is it more a commercial method? Do you know?
Yeah, there's a few gun valuers out there in Brisbane who specialise in them, who are really, really good. And it's usually a gross yield is the key thing. So they'll look at a gross yield, capitalise a gross yield, and also capitalise a net income as well. Net income's not really talked about in unit block spaces as much, just because the outgoings aren't actively publicised. When you're selling a block, you don't typically list off the outgoings, so they're not publicly known. It's hard to analyse. So most talk gross, but the valuers will look at a net yield approach, a gross yield approach, and also a rate per unit approach. So
and development, if there's development upside.
And of course, if it's a development site, then the land value might surpass what the asset value is. Yeah,
we purchased one in New Farm about 14, 15 months ago, and that was, quite a significant development site as well. And we had it valued recently, and it's the uplift is quite incredible based on yield on that basis, but also development. So it's been quite a success story.
Yeah, we've done a few too, where you take it to market expecting that it is a yield buyer, and just because of location, a developer comes along. It gives them holding income through their DA
That's
phase.
it. That's the holding income part, because that's the issue with more broadly the development site market at the moment.
Correct.
Is that
you got to sit on a side if you want to wait the costs to sort of level out. Yep.
And all the competition in the marketplace too. We were just talking about like the short stay and everything. Like you're bringing in trades just to do all the infrastructure projects. So
correct. Yeah.
It's a hard one but that holding cost.
And it probably brings to the other appeal of these properties is replacement value. So replacement cost of a 6, they're, like Nikki said, they're big 120 square metre units. So they've got 6 of those things. The cost to replace that sometimes aligns with what purchasers pay for these properties, simply alone. So,
and if you do them up to a high spec and they're these big apartments, like there's a huge market for that.
Yep. Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, and I think it's hard to see it going any other way but upwards in terms of demand for rental accommodation and for units in Brisbane. It's some really strong tailwinds there.
So I suppose this is a market that is only diminishing in size, though. It's not, I'm sure people aren't really building apartment buildings and then just selling them in one line unless there's some sort of distress factor. But a lot of these are probably exiting the market with, redevelopment. And so, that scarcity just makes it worse, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the beauty of, development sites, once they're developed, we can't sell them again. Well, a unit block, for the most part, they're going to be held by 30 or 50 years, and that investor might go and sell them in 10 years' time. So, there's still some turnover, I guess, versus the development side aspect. But yeah, absolutely. They're so thinly traded, and usually once someone buys them, it's a long-term acquisition. No one's buying these things unless you are selling down to hold. Usually you're holding them, it might be a 10 or a 20-year time frame to hold on to them.
They're those family assets. Yep. They're sitting on them for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said,
the kids' issue, the kids worry.
Yeah, exactly.
We've come across a few recently. We purchased one in Nunda on the north side of Brisbane a few weeks ago for a client, and that had been purchased for something like 1.4 million 3 years ago.
Okay.
Five in a line.
Yep.
Owner came in, fixed them up, put new IKEA kitchens in.
Yeah.
Painted them. New window coverings, that's it.
Yes.
Nice and tidy though.
Yes.
And we bought it for $2.5 million. Now he's had a good uplift, and we think we've got the deal of the century at that level, because there's still more to go.
Yes.
In when we can renew the rents. So and they're still, in my view, under rented. So there's some value there even at a quick turnaround. A lot of people are doing that as a strategy
With
as well.
something like that, do you guys just rent them yourselves, or do you actually engage an agent to look after them?
So I've had an incredible experience with a property manager
Okay.
who has personally taken these on.
Okay.
And I might give them a plug, actually.
Go.
Natalie South at Housemark, she's an absolute weapon, and she's taken these on for my consortium personally, but most of my clients as well. And the big case study is the one I mentioned, the first six pack we bought a few years ago. She got the rents up from 5% up to we're pushing 9% now over the course of a very short period. She's done that for clients of mine as well. And she's also taken on another project for a client, which is quite a rundown building. She's managed to get the rents up to a level that is above what possibly they should be for the standard, basically.
Yeah.
They need a bit of work. And she'll project manage the works as well for the ones that actually need it. So they've got a couple of them need new kitchens. She's organising all of that.
Yeah.
All within, quite a slim project management fee. So that's I call her my secret weapon in these. So,
no secret.
Yeah.
There are some very, very good managers out there, and they do have to have really difficult conversations.
Oh, for
so
sure.
particularly when we're giving advice to an owner, it is the first port of call is make sure you're working with a really good, capable property manager who has your best interests at heart, but also can have these tough
Well,
conversations.
there's been so much legislation changes when it comes to tenancies around the country, and it's you really need to know the ins and outs and what you can and can't do, and make sure managing that process is going to be really difficult.
It's not uncommon because you've had the same owner of these blocks for 30, 40 years that tenants have been in there for just as long.
Yeah, and they're so totally under-rented, and they just probably give them a bit of cash and
correct. Yeah,
money's just going in their account. And you're like, they're happy to stay there. They don't complain about the leaky taps or anything because they're paying under.
And there is, the one in the ones that we've got, we have tried to look after some of those tenants because they're really good tenants. They keep the place really clean and tidy. And there is a bit of give as well.
Well, they're a commercial investment. Like you're here to to make money, and the income is super important. It pays the bills, and it's But there is a really nice kind of capital uplift at the other end, and we've definitely seen it. Brisbane's just been going crazy in terms of, and it's not going to change. Like the fundamental supply and demand, population. There's we talked about Olympics, infrastructure. There's everything. But I'm not from here, so I can't really pump it up too much. But but Brisbane, this is the place to be. Everything I seem to write is always very Queensland heavy and Queensland positive. But so it's a hard one to kind of pick. But what's the opportunity in this market? It's hard to identify what an opportunity could be because it is try to find one of these things and jump on it. That's
trying to find them. It's trying to find them, and I mean we've worked together. We've tried to work together on a number of opportunities, and a lot of these owners are quite hard to unstick as well. And so it's finding buyers who will, provide the terms that the sellers need. Sometimes there is a little bit more in it for the seller than ordinarily would be. But, they're quick to gain, given capital growth and yield. So there's a number of ways to try and find these assets and get them to sell, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I think there's just some very significant tailwinds for a residential unit block, over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, the way Brisbane is trending. So, to anyone out there looking to buy one, I'd be very confident when you're bidding for one to know, there should be strong growth to come. And there's some pretty significant...
Best foot forward.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so why would an investor choose to buy a block of units compared to just, say, buying a normal residential property or multiple residential properties?
Yeah, so in the resi space in Brisbane, you can typically get maybe 2 to 3%, maybe 4% of gross yield if you're lucky, whereas within the unit block space, you can push that, like I said, up to 8, 9%, maybe even 10% if you do the short stay. So there's just a lot more in it for a unit block with not much of it, particularly if you're buying the smaller ones. It's not much of a difference.
And maybe outgoings as well, because it's like I know the council rates and all those sort of things would be more expensive, but it's one lot of that, one lot of insurance. Perhaps that would probably
it's
pay
probably
a
a quantum mass conversation too, where just, when you do have that greater amount of money to invest in something, you can buy something with economies of scale. So you can buy 6, you can get lower outgoings, better net returns.
Yes.
And yeah, they have a couple of, additional assets than a typical unit, particularly with the land content, more than anything. If you're buying a single unit, you're subject to 5 other owners, even if you're sitting on a development site. Mm-hmm. If you own a complex of 6, you can develop that at your will. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's more flexibility. Before we end, I want to mention something that we're seeing particularly in Sydney is this kind of idea of boarding houses, which is, as you may know, is a really strong growth asset class in Sydney, I suppose. Same thing, it provides a really compelling income stream for the buyer. It is affordable rent to some extent, and they've been modern, like newly built boarding houses. Like, we're not just talking about the old kind of like 60s and 70s buildings. There is plenty of those too. Is that something that you've seen here, or do you envisage that becoming a part of your marketplace? Because the yields that they're achieving on these are not dissimilar to they're really treated very similarly.
They are, yeah. There's something in Brisbane called Class 1Bs. So they're sort of semi-shared accommodation. They're 5 units. You've got to have only a single person per room. They're pretty widely developed at the moment across Brisbane, albeit typically a position in the outer suburbs, because you just need to acquire the land at a reasonably affordable rate to make the project work.
Yep.
Very difficult to make it work if you're buying it in Bulimba. But if you're going to, further out, it makes more commercial sense. Reboarding houses, I think it's just going to be the benefactor of the strength of the rental market and the affordability challenges out there. So there'll be a lot of renters looking for what is affordable, accommodation close to transport, amenity, everything else.
Universities.
Which the university where they don't need a car, ultimately.
Yeah.
I would have thought that could only continue to strengthen. The challenge with those is always, has been, particularly with COVID, there was a bit of a hiccup around shared accommodation and the difficulties in managing a complex through that. I think we're over that hump, and groups are now looking at these assets. But most of them sit on good blocks of land too. So they've got similar fundamentals to a block. There's just a harder management component ultimately. Yeah.
Are any of your clients active in that Sydney space?
Not typically.
No.
I know a lot of people who are looking at doing them, but there seems to be more of that stock around.
Yeah.
And the reason why people come to me is because the stock is so scarce, and they're looking at ways to access this kind of stock.
Yeah.
Not necessarily via auction.
Yeah. Do you still think that is an opportunity for buyers out there?
Absolutely.
Looking at that, they can't get into kind of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, you'd mentioned the student piece, because there just hasn't been a lot of that kind of student accommodation being built to the same extent as other places, particularly up here in Queensland. Correct. And we know people do travel for school. It's not just international, it's domestic students too. A lot of these student accommodation properties, half of them are actually domestic students, which you wouldn't have thought it. But yeah, it's interesting. It really just goes to show the difficulty in the rental market.
Yeah, it is hard.
The challenge there, I think, is again construction costs for new builds.
Yeah, yeah.
But
at least with student accommodation, you don't need to do basement and parking and that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So that but to some extent, a lot of the boarding house type properties, there's not a lot of that either. Like, it is a bit more of a cost effective, if you like, method of construction. Yeah,
absolutely. And it makes sense. So again, you're talking to that affordability in the market. It's students or boarding houses.
Yeah.
The rents are to the point where if a renter can't afford a 2-by-1 bedroom unit elsewhere, they've got to look at a boarding house option, and I think that's a trend that's going to continue as rents increase.
Yeah, it certainly will. I think that's all we have time for today. But this is super interesting, and particularly that short-term stay stuff. That's really fascinating. I didn't know that Airbnb was such a big part of that market. Yeah, super. I can imagine it would be. And particularly, like you said, we've got those kind of nearly fly-in, fly-out type trades and medical staff and stuff like that coming up to Queensland. So, great asset class. very hard to get into by the sounds of it, but a really good one that's seen really good returns, continues to see good returns, and some real upside for those buyers. But thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you, James.
No worries.
This is really, really interesting.
Awesome.
I hope everybody that tuned in got to learn something new about the block of unit market here up in Brisbane. And also we do a lot of work in Sydney as well, and also in Melbourne. So if you've got any questions, reach out to me or even James. You've got contacts around our RWC business around Australia. But thank you for joining us, and thank you again, Nikki. Appreciate it. Nikki's been our first female guest actually on Between the Lines Live. So welcome, Nikki.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so
great.
much.
Thank you, and thanks, James. And we'll
Vanessa.
see you next time. Thank you.